Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Braverman,
And I'm Ellen Selm.
and welcome to Stories from the Earth podcast. This is episode 23.
This is where we like to explore mankind's relationship and connection with the natural world.
So today we have a very special guest. We have Deanna Rose here with us. She was the first person that I interviewed in this herbalist interview series that has turned into this podcast. So we're really happy to have her on, and this is sort of like a anniversary of that beginning. So we almost have two. We have where we officially decided to do this as a podcast, and then we have this tiny seed of an idea that has grown.
Come full circle.
Yes. So we're also going to be talking about story and herbalism and some of the ideas that we spoke about last week on a Weedwifes Remedy, which is the role that stories play in herbalism. So we're sort of continuing on, and it sort of happened where this happened organically. We didn't plan this. We just were like, that's what happened with Weedwifes Remedy. And then we were like, well, we're going to talk about this with Deanna, and it worked out well. We're going to start with just sort of a little catch up. Deanna, what have you been doing since we last chatted?
Yeah, because I guess last time was start of the pandemic. So how have you been keeping yourself busy over this past year?
Yeah, well, it's good to be talking with you all today. And yeah, so over the year, it's been kind of a rotation of different projects I've been involved in. I have been focusing mostly on outdoor education with kids, actually, in the forest and in the garden. So I've been working at the Growing Forest School. And when I haven't been working there, I've been working at the Educational Garden Project at Hall Creek Commons, and
Nice.
also Forest Fridays, sometimes just my own hikes with kids. And so when I'm with the kids, I'll teach them about just different herbs on the walks. I'll teach them about different herbs in the gardens, as well as just teaching them how to make herbal salves or teas or more. And so I've been just doing a lot of childcare.
What age range are you mostly working with?
It depends on the program, but it's mostly been from around age 3 to 10.
Oh, wow. It's a big range. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. Get them started young.
Definitely. And just it's amazing to see their respect for the earth. And I just find that's really important, is just to start them young and get them connected now so they don't have to remember later on. So, and I've also
now, is this a program that you have spearheaded or you're partnered in on?
No, I've just been hired as a teacher for these programs. From my personal program on Fridays, that's my own thing. That's my just independent, more casual one. But the other ones are programs run by incredible folks, and I'm just hired on.
Nice.
And we'll put whatever links to, we'll put all those, links. And if you have a link, I think you have a website. Is that correct? We'll put all those in the description. And I think just on the childcare has been important and a struggle for a lot of parents during the pandemic. So that's really cool that you're not only getting the kids out of the house, because everyone's been doing this kind of mobile computer learning, and a lot of our interactions are on the computer, and so they're just the parents are getting a little break, and they're also getting outside in the world, and so I think it has extra meaning right now. So that's
yeah, for sure.
So cool.
Definitely. And so that's my dog sneezing.
Is that your donkey?
But yeah, so it's been great. And also I've been, so with Blue Ridge Healers Without Borders, which is what I talked about more in my last talk, I've been kind of taking a pause on spearheading that and gathering with like 6 other community organizers, and we're kind of combining forces, so it's not just on our own.
Oh.
We are called All Our Relations, and we're going to be doing a bunch of different, and it's a diverse group of people from all different backgrounds, and we're going to be doing work kind of like Blue Ridge Healers Without Borders, but but in a different, bigger way. And so we haven't quite come out of the box yet, but we are going to be presenting ourselves more soon, and so that will be great.
That sounds awesome. And maybe we can have you guys on. Once that once you get fully up and going, and I get about 10 people on here at the same time. Not that we.
Some of our plans are we're going to be doing like some online probably conferences as well as outdoor ceremonies and gatherings, and just focusing on trauma healing and herbalism and more. So
that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it's always good to pool the resources too. When you got a good brain trust of a lot of people, it's like just get it together and you can do something bigger that way. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I've learned this year is definitely to collaborate and to just not do things on your own. Just like create a beautiful kind of interdependence, just create a stronger community, and it's a lot more sustainable that way.
I think personally that's also been a lesson for me, just to be able to ask for help more, and also I think working in partnership is really like what a lot of us need to do going forward. I can't do it on my own. I mean, I know I'm awesome, but like I just can't do it on my own. I have to admit that. And that's why I brought on Ellen to help with this next phase of this podcast, and just also in general with another project that I've been thinking of morphing into its next stage, is going to trying to take on more people and have more of a collaborative effort.
And it's not ideal to have all the pressure to be like the person who knows and does it all, because nobody's ever going to know everything. Just leverage your knowledge and balance it out with other people who can fill in the gaps. So.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, that's exciting, and just let us know, and we'll have you guys on. We're gonna just dive into our topic now, which is the story in herbalism. And so, what, in your opinion, what would you say is like the function for like telling stories about herbs?
Well, for me, it's just, for one, it depends on the learner, but for me, it feels like it makes it more personal, and it opens my heart and like my soul to like learning about it, instead of just like some scientific facts, which is also very beneficial too. It's just creating that balance. But hearing the story makes it just like hit home for me. And for me, with the way I learn, stories help me remember about the herbs and other things more than just scientific facts. It creates just like this personal connection. And then I end up telling that story more than like sitting. I don't really sit around and just speak scientific facts, but I do speak stories. And so it's more likely for the knowledge to be shared like through story.
I agree. It makes the plants more personable.
Yeah.
And you feel like you, instead of like sort of facts on a sheet, you feel like you can relate to them better. Then you remember the facts more. Like there's usually facts embedded into some of the stories and some of the myths. I know there's one about the sassafras and how it has the five leaves and the mittens. There's a story, and you could just remember that. It helps you remember, like, I think it's sassafras.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So anyway, but you can, in that story is like, okay, it has 5 different leaves, and then what each one is embedded in the story. So that's really cool, and it's a really nice packaged way to impart that information and to remember that information. And there's so much information to learn about each herb that it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and like for my family, my great grandfather would make sassafras, like root beer and stuff while he was raising my grandmother and her other siblings. And sometimes when I tell people about it, sometimes just like adding humor too, where like it's like it will cleanse your system, and so it'll help you be more vital and like live longer and have more energy. And so I would say, oh, and I'll make you sassy longer. So you just be like, oh, sassafras, like, oh, I want to have a long, sassy, vibrant life. So you can like, adding in that humor and that within the stories can be kind of fun. And I used to tell that a lot when I worked for Navitat as a zipliner guide. I would like guide people and send them on the zip line, but I would also teach them about herbs, like do herb walks with them while walking to each zipline course.
Nice.
So yeah, there was a lot of sassafras on that trail. So we would talk about it a lot.
I'm sure that function of story comes in handy too in your work with children, just to help them connect more readily.
Definitely.
Well, can you maybe share with us a favorite story of yours about herbs? Like if you have any good sort of folklore and anecdotes to tack on to what you just told us about being sassy?
Well, there's so many, but for one that comes to mind recently is just like learning about time and like the plant time, and also just like and how that can be do a nice dance with like real time. So time, the plant has been around since like I think it was like 1550 BC, and they started using it in Egypt, but it's most known like way back like in ancient Greece, where they would use time for like they would wear the time on their shoulders. They would wear it, they would smell it, they would put the oil on their bodies for bravery and courage, because thymus means bravery and courage. And so just like, and like all the different goddesses that would wear it as well, I guess there was many women that would go to war, or they would use it for healing practices and more. So just kind of like, I feel like it's important in this time period to like remember different herbs that bring us courage and bring us bravery, because otherwise we'll just get trampled over. And so just like creating that inner warrior without having to use the sword anymore, but using that just like coming from the heart. So yeah, and also time was used, like in Celtic lore, it was like time invited fairies into your life. So just different regions have different stories with different herbs, and so like in Celtic lore, fairies, time brought fairies into your home. So if you didn't want fairies in your home, then you wouldn't bring time into your house, into your kitchen. If you did, you would cook with time. And so it just really varies on region. There's some stories of time, how time was in with the baby Jesus, and it was just a very holy plant, and just like the smell of it is just goes way back. And so yeah, it's just fun to learn how the different stories and different. So some thought was for war, some were or being brave for war, some were being for connecting with fairies. There's just many, and it's just fun for me to connect to it as just like stepping into my inner like heart warrior in these times. I
like how the idea is that plant in particular got equated to bravery and strength and so forth, because it really is such a kind of tiny, delicate plant. but it's so pungent and it's so medicinal. So it really packs a punch. I can kind of see how there was that crossover attachment made to it. I love how with story, even little anecdotal things like that, sometimes people in our modern era might be like, well, why, especially if you don't know anything about the herb, it's just like, seems arbitrary, to just say this means this, but if you start to dig and you learn a little about the plant and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So there's those little cues in there that remind you, what the plant might be good for, whether it's metaphorical or the metaphor is kind of pointing towards its further, physiological actions. It's awesome.
Definitely. Like fun. It's like, oh, is it antiseptic or antimicrobial or and does that give them the courage to go out because they have these healing like you said, like having that correlation of like, why does it give you bravery to go out in these times? And yeah.
And then like with yarrow, right? It's I think it's connected with Achilles and kind of like, I think, protection and in like battle, I believe. Nice. And then so like it's also, but then you can use it for wound care, right? Like, so
yeah, it'll stop bleeding.
That's another like connection there where like the story sort of goes along with what the actions of the plants or what the plants are can be used for medicinally as well.
Definitely.
I just have a tendency. Have a tendency to when I hear interesting factoids, my brain just kind of starts connecting it into other things that might come to mind. And so this is with a grain of salt, right? This was just my thought process using knowledge that I know and connecting dots in interesting ways. You mentioned, like you said, thymus, which is the genus of that plant family. And it's spelled the same way as thymus, like the organ in our body, which is part of our immune system or our immune system's regulatory capability. And it's not as active in our bodies as we get older, but it is responsible for generating T cells that regulate the immune system, right? So what's interesting to me is in years of speaking with people dealing with chronic illness, in my lines of work, there's a lot of fear that goes along with chronic illness, especially like an autoimmune condition, because an autoimmune condition is like the ultimate manifestation of the body just kind of not knowing what to do anymore, right? It's turned on itself. It's tried so hard to protect you that it's overprotecting at that point. And there's some theories that because no one 100% knows yet scientifically why autoimmune gets triggered, but there's some thought that there might be a root to the thymus gland and its activity. So bear with me on my rambling train of thought here. I'm like, you said thymus, the plant, and the plant's historical sort of attachment to bravery and strength. And what is it that people who might be suffering a chronic condition where the body has tried so hard to protect it that it's turned on itself, they need more bravery and strength. So how beautiful is that there's just kind of this almost linguistic little connection in there. That's so weird, but fun.
It's amazing.
That's the magic of it all.
Yeah. And that marries the science and the folk.
Yeah, not to mention thyme is a really good immune herb, so.
Right, which is also gives you protection.
How we need both. Like we need the science and we need the folklore. Both is very important. That's a beautiful way of how it all showing how it all interconnects.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not super literal, but if something helps point to something else so that you have that memory recall to make it useful information, that's the beauty of story.
Definitely. It's just learning the plants is I think it's like one of the most challenging for people because there's so many plants. There's how do I learn them? How do I get to know them? How do I go about doing this thing? And I think it's part of the thing that we've sort of lost because we don't have like the one-on-one herbal teacher to mentor anymore, really. And I think this story bit is a big piece of how you can go about learning these plants and reconnecting to them. It's just like reading the very old stories, and also our stories that we are creating, our personal stories, and those are also very important to tell. And I really I've read this idea in several books. One was in Byron Ballard's book, Roots, Branches, and Spirits, that we covered. And then in a Weedwifes Remedy, talking about how like we take these ideas and we make them our own, and then we can pass them on. It's like a living thing. It's not stagnant. It's always changing and growing. So we can add our piece to the lore, to the herbal story, and I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's important to think of it as a living word, so to speak, because I think humans have a tendency to just assume if it's ancient, then it somehow deserves extra reverence and over anything we might do, say, think today. And it's like, well, I mean, back then it was just today for them. It was no less relevant. So yeah, it's important not to sell ourselves short in the modern time either.
Yeah. And we are part of the story, and we're creating, her story now. So
yeah, it doesn't get stagnant. It keeps changing and growing with how we change and grow. And I think that is really important for knowledge and tradition and ideas. And it also makes you feel like your experiences matter. I think that's really, really nice.
Yeah, and that's super important, because with everything going on in the world, it's hard to know where our purpose is, and we have to be reminded that we matter, and that's where we have to learn to tell us, like, what story are we telling of our lives, and tuning in to just like, how do we talk to our bodies? What stories do we say about our lives? What stories do we share to others? Do we downplay ourselves? Do we share just hard stories? Do we just share positive stories and don't talk about the grief? Like, learning what stories of triumph in our lives, and that they're important to share, and that and like gravitating towards people that want to hear your story, and people you want to hear theirs, and because that is just, it's so ancient in our bones to learn and connect and create intimacy through storytelling. And that's been, in some ways, in some parts, it has been lost or just been transpired to like books or whatever, and like being like, oh, I'm not a storyteller, but actually realizing that every human is a storyteller, and they don't have to be able to tell a whole hour story, but even just a 5-minute one is very important, and it could change someone's life trajectory. So yeah, just, it definitely feels like important to and I've been thinking recently of like, how do I even talk to my body? And I noticed myself saying I was really just tired the other day, and I was just like, I can't believe I'm only 31 and I feel this tired, and then I had to change that story, where I had to be like, just kind of give myself compassion for everything that's going on in my life and the world, and just kind of start telling my body and myself a different story.
Yeah, this past year for sure is like, people have got to learn to be gentle with yourself and give yourself that time and space, whatever that might mean.
So even before you add like the herbal component, a story has a healing aspect to it. So that's really, that's what I was thinking. That's really cool. Yeah, the stories we tell ourselves are really important. The narratives of our lives and who we are. And sometimes you have to, in order to sort of shift things in your life, you have to be like, well, what am I telling myself about myself? We don't even realize what we're doing a lot of times. And sometime in my life, I have taken on stories that people have told me about myself, and I believe them. Woo! And Yeah, and they're not true. I'm like, why did I believe this person who told me I was stupid or something? I'm like, I'm not stupid. Or whatever, anything. Usually it's negative, and for some reason I have a hard time believing the negative than the positives. Like, I don't know if that's true for everyone, but like, I feel like a lot of the stories I've taken on have been negative, and I've been in this process of been like, well, that's not true. But what is true? Who, and then you're like, who am I? What's going, then you have to answer that question, and then
you get to define it yourself.
You do.
Yeah, I realize like some of the people that have the biggest opinions or about us or who we worry about really only see about 2% of our lives like on social media or whatever. Then you just like realize a lot of those people that have those opinions don't actually really know you.
Yeah.
They don't, and it's hard. Like, it's really hard, especially like when you're at like in a workspace, because that space doesn't allow for that. I know that there's a ton that I don't know about my coworkers, and I know that there's a ton they don't know about me. Like, just in telling a few of them about doing this podcast and my 2 YouTube channels, and I just realized that you can't see that from the outside, that I'm doing all of this stuff, and then I have this space where I talk a lot, where work is, we're very much doing our own thing at my job. We don't have customers, and we're just sort of like, all of us have like headphones on, and we're all doing our own thing. And I think that people maybe also don't realize that. I think that they take what they think they see as you at work as all of you. I don't think that they realize that there's a lot more to you, even what you present on the outside.
Yeah,
sometimes
I think that's myself doing that too. It's like we all have to like realize, oh wait, we really don't know this person's whole life.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not like I don't want to tell people more, because I tend to just sometimes have no filter and blab and say stuff. But like, it's just, I think in some spaces it's better not to. It's some of that. Sometimes
know your audience.
Yeah, sometimes you don't, there's a reason you don't tell everyone everything. Even though I wish that I could tell more people more things. I wish that like people at work could know me more, and it was safe to say things, but it's just
a bit of a
just not
cultural failing. I think the more disconnected we've gotten in modern society, everybody's kind of got tunnel vision, blinders. They're stressed to the max, and they can just control that little bit of what they can control. And it's just it's a lot to ask for a lot of people to try to let just enough of a guard down to relate to one another's humanness sometimes, which is a shame. But I don't know, we need more of those kinds of social skills and realizations built back into our societal framework somehow to help kind of nurture that. I am happy to hear that like the term EQ, emotional intelligence, is kind of circulating workplaces and stuff a little more as like a trendy thing. So if people start to think about that more and what that means and learn what that means, maybe that'll help shift some of that kind of mentality in those environments. Who knows?
Maybe once we get to have more different types of workspaces that allow for more humanness, more cooperative workspaces, where like has that built in, where you're able to be more of a human. I feel like work just would be happy if I was like a robot and never got sick and never needed like a break.
And that's where I feel like we're having somewhat of a divide starting to happen. There's two things that are happening. There's like more robotic culture, less in-person connection, more just like social media, or more just like electronic, robotic kind of culture. And then there's also like this like beautiful renaissance happening that is like bringing people back to the earth, bringing people back into more in-person connection, like outdoors, and also just like creating like emotional, the awareness of emotional intelligence and connecting to people's souls, not just their bodies. and what they can do for you. And that's where we are kind of like the midwives of of the non-robotic culture of like, hey, let's come back to the earth. Hey, let's come back to story. Hey, let's come back to looking each other in the eyes. Like, hey, let's, take down our walls and actually connect so that we can create a beautiful community of interdependence, and that will support our mental health, and that will support the earth healing, and that will um, create more thriving and not just surviving. Because when we're just like surviving, then we aren't able to, we're it's like a system that creates us to be in survival mode, so therefore we don't have the energy to protect the earth. We don't have the energy to come together. And so when we are coming together in this like in this community unity kind of way, and we're actually thriving, then we can show up better for protecting the waters and getting more, more people fed and beyond. So that's what I'm just choosing to focus on, is just like how there's two roads that humanity can take, and some people will be taking the other road, to robotics and just creating farms that are just relied on robotic workers and not humans. And then and then at the same time, there's more farmers than ever before. There's more herbalists than ever before. I mean, not ever before. Maybe like it's coming back.
Yeah.
And just like, and how there's there's more BIPOC community getting land again, and which is beautiful. And so yeah, it's unfortunate that this is happening, and it's also like really beautiful in many ways, because it is, after this past year, many people are like appreciating the arts again more, appreciating farmers again, because when they realized, crap, like within a month, like there was food shortages in the grocery stores, and they're like, wow, like our farmers do amazing work. And yeah, so an herbalist, and just like some people are just focusing on the vaccine and not talking about herbs for just regular immune system. And so it's just like we need to have the balance of it all. And so we won't get into that debate, but just like having the balance of like regular immune system herbs that keep us healthy as well, having that discussion, which hasn't really been at all in the mainstream. Just like regular maintenance.
Yeah, I find that I encountered that a lot at the start of things. People asking, what should I take for this? What should I take for this? Or, to protect against it. And I'm like, the same thing you should do for your immune system, regardless of what you're trying to potentially ward off. I mean, the immune system is the immune system. And if you're supporting it well, then you're going to lower a lot of likelihoods of risk, and our culture, because we've gotten, maybe the mechanization has exacerbated it, but we've definitely we focus so much on like one thing at a time instead of that whole picture. We end up kind of further dividing ourselves sometimes, because there's so many people who they're scared of the loss of the earth connections, which is a very valid fear to have, given that we're a part of the earth and never have not been. Humans are so capable of ingenuity that it's like we can't sell ourselves short for the potential. So it's like, again, that truth's usually sort of somewhere in the middle with like the balance, like you're saying. It's like, ideally, yeah, sure, if a robot could replace you at your job in a warehouse, wouldn't that be ideal? Because maybe it would free up time, because if we're talking about on massive worldwide scales, if our technology is doing anything for us, it ought to be making our lives, quote unquote, easier, in the sense that it would open up the realms of possibility for us to delve further into the special things that make us human and more connected, we used to live that way, and it was simplistic. And then we overly complicated things for ourselves, but we've complicated things enough to the point that maybe those technological complications could take the wheel a bit and allow us the freedom to then go back to doing more of what we want because we want to and not just because we have to, I guess.
My fear is that because of how business thinks, that they might just use that to get more work out of us or something like that. Like, it's like, okay, well, now we have the robots and the humans. The idea behind business or the goal or some sort of structure needs to also shift.
Oh yeah, and I think as long as the technology keeps progressing, it probably inevitably will. It's like when the automobile first got invented, a lot of people probably didn't trust it. A lot of people were probably scared of it. Definitely a lot of people couldn't afford it. There wasn't gas stations everywhere. There weren't highways. Some people were like, what the heck is the point of owning an automobile when I could just ride my horse down the road, But it just inevitably over time, because of how things shifted, it just became more obsolete to have the horse and buggy. It'd be nice if we made a conscientious effort on a cultural and global scale to redefine what work is, labor and trade for your hours and whatnot. And people are working towards that, don't get me wrong. It's just as likely that will go alongside with just what happens as a byproduct of the inevitable march of change. Hopefully within our lifetimes. That'd be nice.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it feels like, and I think that's the beauty of why people like us are sharing our stories, and like why you all are doing this podcast, and like stepping into this leadership role, is because it's more empathetic, earth-based people are going to be stepping more into leadership roles, and disconnecting from the greed and disconnection. I mean, there's going to be both always, but I feel like the empathetic, earth-based leader is the new goal, and is rising. It's
we got to have these conversations to get that ball rolling.
Right, because we're creating a new story, to get from where we are to where we want to be. Yeah, that takes creating a new story or maybe not checking out completely, because there's probably some good things from where we are right now that we want to carry forward. I don't believe it's all awful. How technology and herbalism can go hand in hand, and also probably with farming and things like that. Like just these technologies like the tractor and all that stuff are very important. I can speak for myself as having too much unbalance in my life. I'm definitely feeling that stress, overwork, push capitalism thing. So it would be really nice if it can be shifted. And I also think there's like this, also the idea of like my coworkers in the past and people I've worked with have expressed that there's this idea of you aren't up to like working at this capacity, that there's something wrong with you, or you're like a wimp, like if I never call out, I'm doing good, right? Like never take a sick day. Well, take a sick day, man.
Not even a sick day, but like a mental health day, or just like self-care day. Like, you shouldn't have to be sick to take a day off.
We need to tell ourselves that, hey, that's fine. You're a person. You can take a day
or a week.
Yes, I would. I mean, for a month, whatever. But going back to something that you said, Deanna, about leadership, us stepping into a leadership role, for me, that's definitely like a new thing, because I was never in a leadership role before. I've never been in one. Unfortunately, in my friends group, and I mean, I don't know if high school is a good example, because I know a lot of people have terrible high school experiences, but like I was always like the one whoever won did not listen to. They did not, like, my thoughts were, I felt never valued. And of course, eventually I just sort of was like, I'm going to be by myself. Bye. You guys are not actually friends. It's been not my experience to, when I talk, people are like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'm interested in that, or I hear what you're saying. And so the story of this podcast has been me really sort of stepping out of that. I have ADD. I have sometimes hard time expressing. That's been challenging, but we have editing, so that's good.
Technology.
Woohoo! Technology. Feels good to be able to do something that is in a leadership capacity. And I really do feel like we are doing something on this podcast, that we are contributing to a possible better future. And I think that's really cool. We're gonna ask the next question. So Deanna, do you have a personal herb story, or that you would be able to share with us today?
Yeah, I would like to share. I have two I would like to share. There. So one time I was like working in the garden, and I was like just like digging or weeding or something, and all of a sudden I was barefoot, and the spider bit my ankle.
Oh.
And it ran. I was like chasing it, trying to see what kind of spider it was. I was like, it was like just this sharp, like, boom. And I saw it, and I started chasing it, and and it just went so fast that I couldn't figure out, because I was like, I need to know what type of spider that was. And so then then it started swelling, and so I went down the road to this urgent care, like doctor's office that's like urgent care, and you can just walk in. And so I got into the office. I had to wait for a long time, and then once the doctor came in, they were like, "Oh, it looks just like a sweat bee sting. It wasn't a spider." And I was like, I saw it happen, and it's definitely way more swollen than a sweat bee sting would be on me. And they were just like, no, it's not a big deal. Just take some Benadryl.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of angry. So I was just like, all right, so I'm going to have to figure this out myself. Because it was like new on, like the first, maybe like, it was like the third year I was studying herbalism. So I was like, all right, so they just want me to take Benadryl and not put anything on the spider bite, and it's starting to swell, and I'm having a hard time walking.
Wow.
It was starting to swell so much I couldn't walk. So I went to the garden, and pulled out a culpepper book. And the great thing about culpepper is they use a lot. I believe it was culpepper. It's been like 13 years since this story has happened, but it's one of most resonant stories I still have, for just like always like coming back to yourself and continuing to do research. So I looked up what was good for spider bites in that book, and it said basil, just like regular culinary basil. Because we normally try plantain, and I was using it, and it wasn't quite working for this specific situation. So I chewed up just regular green culinary basic basil, and I had never heard of it being used medicinally before. So I chewed it up, and I kept putting the poultice of the basil on my spider bite. And then within like 20 minutes of having, or maybe a little bit longer, maybe 30 minutes of having it directly on the spider bite, all this like black goo started coming out. All the venom and stuff started coming out.
Wow.
And then by the next day, my foot was not swollen anymore, and it was fine. So, all this guck came out. And so, yeah, it just showed me the power of just even like basic culinary herbs are not basic at all. they're like thyme, how I was mentioning before, like the reason why they're actually so prevalent in our kitchens is because they are so medicinally powerful as well. And so, but yeah, so that's when I kind of just like, my mind was blown about basil. And so that's when I started researching about thyme and basic different spices and how um, they are just as powerful as the herbs we choose for our teas or tinctures or salves. And
so they're not actually just common kitchen herbs. That's like a term that needs to be sort of changed. Common means sort of like unspecial or it takes away their power. It just it makes them seem less than I think that they are.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of like Tulsi, holy basil has gotten so much more popular for use medicinally and in teas and things in this country over the last decade. Not to say we weren't using it here before, but it's just gotten, a lot of people know what Tulsi is now. And it's just a type of basil. So it's like it in and of itself shouldn't be elevated over your more traditional Mediterranean culinary basil, etc. Like just as an example, like, yeah, definitely we started using it at some point for a reason. There was a global spice trade that was like the largest dollar industry for a long time in the world, because all of those quote unquote common cooking spices were coveted, hardcore coveted, important things. What's your other lovely story, Deanna?
Oh, but first I want to touch in on how that was like a brilliant point about what Jennifer said about like knowing the definitions of different words that we're using to describe herbs. So because we're starting to share our like stories again, or just like knowing the importance of stories, it's also important to know the power of our words. And so that was a brilliant point of like, not when we tell these stories, not using common and beyond. So yeah, another herb story I have to share, is about roses. And I used to not like the smell of roses. I didn't like the smell of roses. I wasn't into roses at all growing up. And then I went to this herbal conference. That's actually how I learned a lot about herbalism in the beginning, is just going to a lot of conferences before going to herbalism school. And so I was at this conference, and there was a rose, like a heart opening kind of meditation, and they put rose petals in our hands. And I was like, oh gosh, rose, like I'm not really into it. And but it was in our hand, and once they started the meditation on rose and heart opening, I felt this just like surge of just energy come from my hands, like up my arms into my heart. And I felt this just like heart healing happening just from holding the plant, not even ingesting it. Um, and that's when I sort of began this relationship with rose, and like, and maybe the reason why I didn't like roses was because I had a certain blockage in my heart. And now my heart, and I have, a history in my family of heart disease and stuff like that. And my mother's lineage. And so it's like, to me, it's just like a whole, and now I'm like obsessed with roses. I have roses on my dress. I have red hair now.
Say you dress hard.
I changed my last name to Rose. But yeah, it also just taught me how you don't always have to ingest medicine to receive the healing as well. And it helps. Like I love drinking rose tea with reishi and hawthorn, and I spray rose spritzer all the time. But just then, it also taught me just like how you can receive medicine not even from ingesting.
Lovely story that such a seemingly, you know, little simple experience that you didn't even know you were getting into when you sat down, you know, had such a profound impact that now, like, you know, your name is even an homage. That's awesome. Very poetic.
Oh, sorry. Also, hawthorn is also a heart opening, a heart herb as well, right?
Yeah, I love hawthorn for like, for like it's great for boundaries as well as just like building the pericardium. The strength of in like high dosages of it, it's great at building the pericardium up around the heart.
Yeah, the first time I had hawthorn was actually, and introduced as it as like a heart herb. I took it as a glycerate, and I was visiting an herb school in Nashville that like no longer exists. And actually we were going through kind of, I call it like a soft breakup, because it was hard because he basically like moved all the way back home, which is all the way across on the other side of the state. It was a really difficult time, but we ultimately never really 100% broke up. But like, man, like I was going through this while I was visiting the school, and I was telling the person that, like, I don't know, was showing me the school, that's how raw I was. I was just like, here's all the stuff I'm going through. And so like I was really feeling it like right here in my heart. Like I was literally like, my heart hurts. And so she's like, have some hawthorn. And I was like, okay. So that was my first introduction to that plant. And I know Ellen has a hawthorn tree on her land, but I think it is no longer, I think it's no longer alive, but I remember
there's a number that are dead, but there's a few that still bloom. I have yet to ever see them fruit, though. I don't know if the animals are beating me to it or if it's just not strong enough to get the fruit out. I don't know. Well, they're very, very old, so
I remember the one I saw, and the tree, and it's a tree that has like freaking thorns on it this big. Like when they're talking about hawthorn, they're talking about hawthorn. It's a really cool tree, and also they used to use it to make hedgerows because of the thorns. And so you can, when you see the tree, you can really see like that it was used as a barrier, and the thorns make it feel like keep away, and then also in the energetic medicine, it's
protecting the heart,
right? And also like having this personal space, right, to use as a barrier. And so I guess that's my little hawthorn
maybe
story.
Hawthorn's like this the strengthening of the heart, and the rose is kind of the softening of the heart, but they both things are important.
Yeah, I think that the hawthorn rose blend is really cool. Deanna, when you were talking about that blend, that's just made me think about that.
Deanna, so obviously humans have been telling stories for probably as long as we've been around, and probably herbs for a really long time as well, you know, specifically speaking about them. Do you think that there's been many changes in the way and why we tell these stories? And if so, in your opinion, what might be some of the differences? Like, what do you think has stayed mostly the same versus changed to fit our times?
Well, I feel it depends on where you live. Which region or which area you live can depend on what has storytelling has changed and what has stayed the same. I feel really lucky to have have learned a lot of my herbalism knowledge from Nashville, from where I got to have in-person herbal conferences where mentors taught me, and where I would sit by the fire and they would tell stories of how they, made the mead or the tincture or the tea. And so I just feel like it depends on where you live, but like if you're in the city, I feel like it has changed in many ways, where people look for like blogs or podcasts or books or written knowledge or spoken knowledge that has been recorded to share, and not as much as in person. And that's just where we go back to finding that balance. But yeah, I think it just depends on where you live and where I learned a lot by the bonfire or in outdoor classrooms, or just, and I also learned a lot through books, a lot through studying, a lot through school as well. And so, yeah, I think it has, um, and there also has been like what has changed, I think, is having that eldership. A lot more elders and medicine people would be the main teachers, which happens in these conferences and stuff as well. But it doesn't happen as much within cities where the elders are in nursing homes or not, or living by themselves or with just another family member and not as connected with the younger community, and not even as connected to the earth as their ancestors were. So they might not even know that knowledge is much. And so that's where um, healing is definitely needing to happen, where that is happening in smaller areas where, like, I've been taught by elders, but not everyone has that privilege. So I really see it as a privilege and an honor that I've gotten to spend so much time with elders learning.
The one of the changes is that it's, I guess you're saying, is that it's less one-on-one, and we're getting a lot of the bulk of our knowledge more from podcasts and books and sort of like maybe the YouTube,
which is super great too, how it's spreading.
Yes, so it's still valuable. Still valuable. I feel like I would love to, just personally would have loved to have found like a mentor that I could study with for a couple of years, learn what they know on like a serious basis. I find myself starting to to find people to show things. So I'm like, hey, you want to, like, anyway, even though like I feel like my knowledge is not where I would like it to be, I feel like I'm sort of sometimes go into the role of the teacher.
Well, it is sometimes said that the real proof in the pudding, so to speak, that you really know something is if you can teach it. So it's a good use of your,
and it's good to not underestimate sharing your knowledge too, because what you know, it's good to start teaching as soon as you know. You don't have to be an elder to teach, and that's also super valid. And just like when I normally realize how much I know when I leave Asheville, and I realize, wow, like most people don't know about nettle, or even just like the basics that and so sometimes I'm like, oh, I underestimate how much I know, and I'm like, oh, I'm not smart, or I don't know that much compared to other folks in Asheville, or I don't have a botany degree or whatever. And then I leave, and I realize, wow, I have so much to teach. Even just like basic nervous system herbs, a lot of people don't know in the mainstream, like skullcap and passion flower and different things. And so just like it's important to learn from the elder as well as learning from us too, and how we may be stepping into that role of teaching elders that have been disconnected from the earth, or teaching our parents or our community and stuff, because we are part of midwifing that knowledge coming back. So definitely don't.
Seems like there's been certainly plenty of changes and additions to the ways in which we, humans tell stories, but the why, it's kind of almost reassuring in a way that the why maybe hasn't changed so much. Like the importance factor, the fact that we even feel that some say, just, as example, plant knowledge is worth passing down, the fact that people still feel that and recognize that and take it upon themselves to do it. I don't think the why that people have for that now is probably any different than it was, thousands of years ago. And that's pretty cool. It's like a nice bridge through time, And that word is the theme of our show. If you've guessed the magic word today, it's the word time.
Oh, and story brought to you by the letter S. The word thyme.
That reminds me that thyme was also one of the recommended herbs for COVID, for putting in our handmade hand sanitizers when we couldn't find any hand sanitizers when they were all sold out. It was one of the main essential oils to put in the hand sanitizer, as well as the diffuser. The diffusers for the air. I totally forgot about that. That was one of the main disinfectants. So,
because we weren't sure how much it was airborne or how much it was like touch based.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I think they didn't know how it was 100% spread. On a little bit on the side note about that, I really loved how like I have a lot of on my YouTube channel. I have a whole section on videos that herbalists had made, and there was just a whole bunch of information sharing among the community, and which that was really cool. I feel like the modern herbal community hadn't had a situation where they had to come together like that. And that was really interesting, and it was really funny because a lot of people in the beginning they were buying like toilet paper and stuff, and I was buying herbs. I was like, oh no, I have the toilet paper. Well, I got some herbs.
Well, there did end up being a shortage on a lot of herbs as the year went on, so
yeah.
we were prescient with that, and all the more reason for folks to try to grow their own when and where they can.
Yeah, get it.
Rosemary Gladstar mentions like we need more herbal growers, not just clinical herbalists, but we need way more herbal growers and farmers.
Thyme is actually the only herb that I stocked up on. Made a point to stock up on at the beginning of all this crazy past year, because I've always had really good luck, affinity for that herb and how quickly and strongly it can be effective. Lungs tend to be a weak point for me, so I didn't want to take any chances. And probably the most drastic thing I'd ever had an herb do for me before was thyme. I used to be in a band that practiced in a very moldy basement, and I developed this horrible cough for months until it finally clicked in my head, like, why do I have this cough? Oh, it's probably because I've been singing in a moldy basement multiple times a week for months. So we moved the band practice, and I started loading up on, I'd tried, other herbs for just cough and allergies in case that's what it was, and just different stuff like that. But thyme paired with fenugreek, those two were like, just would knock it out, clear it up, and help me function in the day. And then once I connected the dots and figured out what the cause of it was, and we changed where we were practicing, I still kept up the thyme regimen for a while just to like get everything back on the up and up again. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, thank goodness for thyme.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that story. Yeah, that's a nice thing of just like how different people react to thyme and like what comes up for them. And yeah, and I'm just curious too, also just like our different genes and how people from different backgrounds and different ancestry of how that affects different herbs affect us differently. So that's why like just looking at scientific stuff can also just be like, oh, like mint is good for this, where actually thyme might be better because of your ancestry, or so that's interesting.
And that's another story, like your ancestry, where you're from is your history, your story of your family. That's really cool. I've never thought about that on that angle of how, because there's a lot of herbs that do very similar action. One of the challenges is like, okay, what herb should I use this herb over this herb, and how do I decide? And I do really like that one way of thinking about how to make a choice is to look and see into your ancestry and your history.
Going back to the idea of considering the language and maybe how the word common can sort of in people's minds devalue an herb in a way. Just as valid of a word to use in terms of its, for things like basil and rosemary and thyme that are in so many kitchens and so forth. Maybe just use the word familiar, because certainly you can't argue that most people are familiar with those things for it being in their kitchen. And familiar is such a nice word because it's like linguistically linked to familial, which is again back to the relationship. So I'm logging that in my mind. Say familiar instead of common.
I like that.
Familiar time.
That's great. That's great. I like that. I like that idea. On this idea of words, there's another word that these stories that we've been sort of telling are called, and they're often called anecdotal. So this is like a definition I got off of La Internet from Google. Anecdotal of an account not necessarily true or reliable because they're based on personal accounts rather than facts or research. Some of those words in there, like it's saying that facts or research are the better thing.
Yeah, it's certainly insinuating.
And I think that when we talk about these anecdotal stories, it does carry an idea about, like, with it, that they're just they don't carry as much weight as like maybe a scientific study or like something more researched. But so the question is, I mean, and I think we've already established this, but do you think that these stories have in fact meaning and value? And if so, what is the importance of telling these stories? But again, we might have already answered that question throughout this conversation. But is there anything else that maybe we think what we could add to that question?
Well, that seems actually pretty correlated to Rosemary, because it's about memory, which is Rosemary is great for your memory and enhancing it. And for me, when people tell personal stories and educate through personal stories, I remember them more, and it helps my memory, and it may help others' memory. And it may sound like a soul level rather than another level. And that's just how I learn. But I notice that others can learn in that way as well, profoundly. And yeah, I just think that's the importance of sharing it, is through story, and just it creates an intimacy. And then you can pass that story on, and someone else can pass that story on, and then you hear it later on, and it might be changed a little, but and that's how song, it can be important as well, where some people educated through song and through, back in the day, like songs, like especially ballads, were the way people shared their news, shared stories, what happened in their community, and hardships, and also how they grew what grew in their farms that year, what was unsuccessful in their farms that year, and that was shared through ballads and bluegrass and folk, also medicine songs. And so that brings me into like storytelling through songs, and as well, where sometimes we remember things if we're seeing them, and like sometimes people have songs about plants and songs about farming, and that's how a lot of farmers honestly get through the day, is through singing themselves or listening to music or something, and that's where those songs come from, and that's where herbalists would sing over their teas they were stirring, and they would infuse the medicine, and being careful of what they were thinking while they were making the medicine for others, and what stories were happening while they were creating the medicine. And so that feels prevalent to me, of like referring back to like when I was younger, and I would go to these mead circles at the end of the night for the herb conference, where people would share, okay, I made this mead, it's with rose and it's with mint and it's with ginger, and I made it while I was frolicking in the fields of Black Balsam Knob or whatever, just like, and we were creating, and we were picking the roses, and we were picking the blueberries or whatever, and we were connecting, and we were having such a joyful time. And then when you drink a sip of it, you feel like this joy. Then there's times where you drink a tea and you hear the story of how it was made, and it was made during a hard time, and there's like deep connection to grief, and maybe you feel your grief, you're able to feel your grief for the first time in a long time, or be able to cry for the first time, like it releases a blockage that you haven't been able to cry in a couple months or something. So it's definitely interesting of like telling the stories of how even just the medicine was made, not even where it comes from or what it does, can create a whole nother
wow. I didn't even
vortex of story. Yeah.
Think about that. And I don't think I would be really interested in hearing like an herbal song, because I don't think I've ever heard one. And I know people used to sing because, we didn't have iPhone, cell phones and iPods and Walkmans and radio at some point where you could just turn on song all the time. And that's real cool.
Yeah, I sing some, and then I also have learned some from others, like, and Josh Fox has a great CD of plant songs.
What is his name?
Josh Fox.
Josh Fox.
I can link to that.
Yes.
Great, lots of medicine songs. And I'm trying to put together the CD. I just haven't fundraised not enough money to record yet, but at some point I will.
You're gonna do a plant-based, plant-themed songs?
It's gonna be a mixture of medicine songs, like some with plants and some with just ancestral stories and more.
That's awesome. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to have you on to perform some of that
Working on
sometime.
fundraising for that to record. I might try to do some simple recording with my laptop to go ahead and get stuff out there, but that's definitely my next goal for my own personal project, my personal creative outlet, is creating a CD.
That would be really great.
But yeah, Josh Fox has a great one that's out.
Okay.
And he's an herbalist in the area and acupuncturist, and he actually holds outdoor ceremonies for grief work as well. So he'll sometimes sing his songs during the grief ceremonies. And
yeah, I just Googled him, so it came up Fox Herbs and Acupuncture. Is that him?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, well, he's local in town.
Yes.
Add him to the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did a grief ritual outdoors I think a month ago, and I feel like that's such important work right now, so that we can release that, and then that helps us actually feel joy on a deeper level again when we release that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
your definition you looked up, Jennifer, of anecdotal, and it says not necessarily true or reliable. Yeah. So it leaves the potential open for it that it could be true or reliable. And I think that it's worth acknowledging that probably has a lot to do with the intention that's put into it. The person relating a story, if they might be just of a more analytical type of personality or very hyper observant or something like that, it might come through with a little more facts presented. Yeah. But that being said, even people who might only remember fractions of things or might embellish something, so one could argue the story was somehow more anecdotal and less true somehow. I think it's worth, and this goes back to connecting to the humanness again. You have to be able to read between the lines of in a sense, or listen between the lines, I guess, in the case of somebody telling you something. Because if they held on to something from it, or whether they felt like they needed to embellish it or not, or if they only remembered bits and pieces, clearly there was something to it that meant something to them, or they wouldn't have held on to that, and they certainly probably wouldn't have bothered passing it along in any capacity. So I always try to, if you're trying to put together something significant in terms of like herbal research or something, you might have to hear a lot of different people's stories and then try to establish a baseline on an average, because not all of them might have all of the facts necessarily. But from, and I hesitate to even use the word clinical, but maybe coaching and counselatory role when you're listening to stories, then it's more important to try to figure out what maybe the more esoteric meaning is, like, why is somebody bothering to share this with me? It might not be so much about this plant or this treatment that they did or this illness that they're experiencing. It might be about something deeper, and they're just choosing this particular story to express an element of it. And then, that really just comes through conversing with the person long enough or more often to get more pieces of the puzzle to kind of construct the whole story out of it. But yeah, I think that's an argument for two different ways to approach anecdotal and how to pull truth out of it that is there, even when it's maybe not super apparent in any sort of textbook kind of way,
I think like common, I think anecdotal is another word that we need to have a different word for these stories.
The alternative to an anecdotal story is to say a personal story.
Okay.
It's personal.
Yeah, personal.
So then you're not arguing so much about the truth of it as you're just hearing the truth of it for the person who's bothering to tell it to you, because clearly it's personal to them,
Yes.
That's the best I come up with on the fly.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I love all of that. That's just, it's a great way of just how this personal story can be a great way to just validate it.
Yeah. And it wasn't like when I started out with some of these ideas, I didn't think about that we would be talking about these two words and thinking about how to shift them, but was interesting to think about.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, and I really appreciate you all giving me a voice. I feel really grateful for that. It's really potent medicine to give people voices. So I really honor that you are doing that service, and I feel really grateful to be on here today.
Thank you. I know that you're not at home right now, so a double thank you for coming, and thank you for helping in this creation. This podcast is a way for me to contribute and be a part and of what's happening, and to give people voices as well. And I think that's really cool. I feel like it's been something that I've sort of been looking for in my life. Well, I want to thank everyone else for joining us. I apologize if I have been extra rambly today, and we will put all of Deanna's links down in the description, and hopefully we'll be having her back for her song music project. I'm excited about that as a lot. Very excited. You can find this podcast on Anchor. We are also on Spotify now, and we have a YouTube channel, Stories from the Earth. We have a Facebook group. If you want to join us, please do. We're on Instagram, and you can support us if you go to Anchor, there's a support button, and you can support us for $1 or $5 or $10 a month. And that support will help us be able to travel and go to herbal conferences and visit herbalists outside of the Asheville area, which we're really excited, and bring you more awesome content. So and we appreciate.
Yeah. You can find me at deannarose.org.
deannarose.org.
And we'll post the other links as well.
I definitely will. So next time we will be interviewing Ellen's sister, biologist, botanist, and conservationist Kat Selm. So that will be pretty awesome. That will be airing on Wednesday, the 26th of May. And new episodes of this podcast drop on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Wednesday of each month. So I hope everyone has an awesome day, and we will talk to you next time. So
thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Go make some time for yourself.
Yes, literally, and take the herb.